Great. It's, I guess it's the 21st of February, 2021. We're going to be studying the book of Esther, chapter 1, from verses 10 to 22. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us to be here one more time to study and scrutinize your word, dear Lord. Give us your godly wisdom to understand your word, and give us your strength to put what we learn into practice. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Okay, last week we started the book of Esther, and last week we read that the King Xerxes, was giving a big banquet for his officials, not only his officials, but for the whole people. And the reason for that was because he was preparing to invade Greece, the country of Greece. He had conquered so many countries already that he had nothing left to conquer, and of course Babylonians were conquered by him, and so he was giving a big feast. It was like 180 days, I believe, but to preparation. Then it was like 7 more days, the actual banquet, and it was a display of wealth. It was display of pride. I mean, they had cups of gold. I mean, the seats were made of gold. I mean, it was unbelievable. And then at the same time, the Queen Vashti, was having her own party in another part of the palace with the women. So we're going to read now the continuation of that. So on the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs to serve him. Against Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagata, Caesar, and Carcass, to bring before Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke to the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king: Karshina, Seter, Adamada, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Memucan, the 7 nobles of Persia and Media, who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. According to law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? He asked. She has not obeyed the king's command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. Then Memucan replied in the presence of the king and of the nobles: Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all women, and so they will despise their husband and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but he would not come. This very day the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice, and so the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his own household using his native language. Okay, so as we were saying last week, we're reading that the king prepared a big banquet because he was preparing to invade another country. So he, in this chapter, he was drunk along with everybody else, and so probably they were talking, when you're drunk, talk nonsense. He said, probably were saying around the table, who is the most beautiful women in the world? They say, well, it's this and that. No, it's the Persian women. It's the women of Babylon. No, no, they were discussing. I'm going to prove it to you. Have Queen Vashti come here and show herself off. I mean, they were high spirits, they were drunk, and of course they sent emissaries to say, and she said, "I'm not going to go." She refuses, because I mean, it was beneath her dignity and all that. I said, I mean, these people are drunk, and so this is the theme of the lesson today. So let's start doing verse by verse. I'm going to read the first verse, verse 10, which involves certain names in here. On the seventh day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits, meaning he was drunk, from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him. The names were Menuhem, Bitza, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zitar, and Carcass. You better write this name because I'm going to ask questions later.
Crazy names.
So he says on the 7th day, that means the last day of the feast. When King Xerxes was in high spirit from wine, what does that mean? He was probably drunk. Okay? And when you are drunk, you make unreasonable demands. I remember I saw on television once that this guy who was driving for Uber, and he had a camera in the car to video the clients. And this guy got in, and he was drunk. And he was doing a lot of things, terrible things. And even hit the guy, and all that. And so he called the police, and the guy was arrested. And he spent the night in jail. And the following day, the guy could not remember anything that happened the night before. And he couldn't believe that he did those things when he was drunk. Okay? And of course, he apologized, but just could not believe it was the same person. Okay. So when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he said when he was intoxicated and did not really know what he said or did, and the talk at the table touched upon the subject of the beauty of women. And probably the king asserted that there were no women as beautiful as those of Babylon. And as a proof of it, ordered his queen to be brought in. So there's no excuse to say that a drunkard is a madman and accountable for his actions. He's accountable for having put himself in his degraded condition. Sometimes when you do something, he said, well, my defense is that I was drunk and I didn't know what I was doing. It was too bad. You're still guilty. I mean, if you're driving when you're drunk and you kill somebody, of course you're going to be convicted. So it's no excuse, not only on drugs, I wasn't responsible because I didn't know what I was doing. Of course you were. You took the drugs in the first place.
Right.
But we live in a society of everybody's a victim.
Yeah.
No accountability. Let me put this in here. Okay. So he commanded the 7 eunuchs. What's an eunuch? Eunuchs were men that were castrated, and they were in charge of the harem for obvious reasons, So eunuchs were castrated men who were assigned to act as harem attendants and as agents of communication between the king and his harem. Because of the level of trust these men could attain, they could also function as administrators of the kingdom as well. So they were not slaves, they were very intelligent people, and not only they were in charge of the harem, but also other positions. When Daniel and his friends were taken to captivity, during this time, people say that he was also castrated. I don't know. Maybe that's what he was.
Well, he had a lot of women, didn't he?
Not Daniel.
Oh no, I was thinking of David.
You're thinking Solomon.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. Maybe he was. I don't know. When we get to that book, we'll analyze it.
Yeah.
Okay, so verse 11, Nico.
To bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, and in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at.
So he sent messengers saying, bring Queen Vashti. And the request was not against her will or by force, but they were sent to let her know that it was the king's pleasure that she should come to him immediately. It is evident from the way in which the incident is introduced that Xerxes had been sober, he would not have asked such a thing. This command, contrary to Persian customs, is not out of harmony with the character of Xerxes, and is evidently related as something strange and unusual. Otherwise, the queen would not have refused to come. He said, wearing her royal crown, that is upon her head, to make her look even more grand and majestic. And he added, in order to display her beauty, because she was lovely to look at. So she was probably a very beautiful woman. The queen's name was Vashti, which signifies beautiful. The whole request was not wisely done. Neither was faithful or safe. Now it comes another thing here that I'd like to mention. Jewish tradition holds that Vashti had been ordered to appear naked before the king. And that's being the thing going there. However, reading the cultural Bible that you and I read,
Yes, it says.
the tradition has no historical support.
Right.
Royal women in Persia enjoyed high social status and were schooled in a variety of skills, including horsemanship and archery. They're known to appear in public, travel with their husbands, and host feasts. There was nothing shameful in simply appearing at a banquet. Rather, it seems that Vashti was being commanded to act in a fashion that she believed was beneath her position. Public displays of beauty were usually expected of concubines, not queens. The fact was that she was told to wear her royal crown not only added insult to injury. The royal crown was a sign of her high status, while the king's summons seemed to have denied her that very status. So it was humiliating for Queen Vashti. The way it was asked on that, she was not just anybody. You know, she was not just a concubine. She was a queen. And she was not treated with respect at all. Okay? Now, she was not putting her life in the line because that was not a punishment.
Right.
Because we can see later that the people were discussing, what can we do about it? If the law would have been black and white, if you refuse and it's death, there would be no question about it. So it was not her life, it was just her position. Okay.
Position.
So verse 12, Roman.
But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger.
Okay, so the queen refuses to appear at the king's command and delivered by the eunuchs. But he did not choose to stake her dignity because he did not choose to stake her dignity as a queen and a wife before his drunken guest. So the queen refused to be treated as an ordinary concubine and to be exposed to the promiscuous crowd of the drunken revelers. The king's command probably found her with a crowd of female guests. What I'm trying to say is that she probably was surrounded by women because she was giving a party to women. And they were watching her. You know, how are you going to respond? You know, and she's like an example for all the women. So as a crowd of women were watching her, she responded in kind. So probably in another time or another occasion, she probably would have gone. But so here, the king's command probably found her with a crowd of female guests that were accompanying her. She might have been inclined at another time to obey, but when she was being looked on, it was a kind of a trial to be required to abdicate her dignity. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Only such a king as Xerxes would have made such a demand upon his queen. But it goes with his character. It's perfectly keeping his character. If the king wasn't drunk with wine, of his reason was not being overpowered by his pride, he would have seen that his own honor as well as hers was well taken into consideration by her dignified conduct. His anger was more unreasonable because his blood was heated with wine, which made his passion too strong for his reason. Otherwise, he would not have thought it decent for the queen to have her beauty, which was very great, exposed in this unusual manner. I would have thought that she has the prudently. So what I'm saying is that if he would have been sober, or if his conscience would have told him something different, he would agree that she acted properly. But sometimes he was too far gone. It reminds me of Herod, when he got drunk and asked the daughter of his wife, "What do you want? I'll give you half of my kingdom." And she said, "I want the head of John the Baptist." He couldn't back off because all the guests were looking at him. He liked John the Baptist, but he beheaded him anyway. Verse 13, Carmen?
Gotta say face.
Yeah, that's very important, right?
Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times.
Now, instead of him making a decision, he tells other people. So he can say, well, they made a decision, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
Now, in those days, the king had authority, complete authority, he can do whatever he wanted. But no, he wanted to share the blame. Misery loves company, right? And to share the blame. So it was customary for the king in any difficulty to have the opinion and advice of those who were experts in the law. and well understood right and wrong. They were called the king's judges. These were men versed in the laws and customs of their age and of former times, and therefore capable of giving proper counsel in any matters of law or precedent. They were not astrologers, but rather men of practical wisdom, who knew the facts and customs of former times. You know, the Bible tells us, pray for godly wisdom and have common sense. There are some things that are just so common sense that you don't need anybody to tell you what to do.
Exactly.
I mean, here, you know, he said, what does the law say about this? There was no precedent about this. It was the first time that, and it was just she refused to come under those conditions. She would have said, okay, let's move on. But no, let's see what the law says. And the law, of course, gets involved and gets very complicated. We're going to see. Okay, verse 14. I'm going to read it because kind of difficult names here. Not that I can do better, but I'm going to try. You know, and so he consulted those people who were closest to the king: Karshena, Shetar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan. Memucan is the person we're going to see later. The 7 nobles of Persia and Media, who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. Now these men had constant freedom and access to the king and were at all times admitted to the royal presence. The Persian kings were not seen by the subjects very often. And that's the way it is sometimes, you know. This is not like American politicians that are on the television constantly. For example, in Japan, during World War II, Emperor Hirohito was never heard his voice. People never heard his voice. The first time they heard his voice, when in 1945 he surrendered to the Allies. And it was the first time ever that the subjects heard his voice on the radio. So these people were up there and the subjects were back here, you know. And in this case, it was more similar. So these people close to the king, they were his chief counselors and officers and assisted him in the administration government. There were several families of the first rank in Persia, from which alone the king could take his wife. Their chiefs were entitled to have free access to the monarch's person. And these people were different countries: the first of Africa, the second of India, the third of Idumea, the fourth of Egypt, the fifth of Resen, the sixth from Marsena, and the last of Jerusalem. Some people say it might be Daniel, but other people say it was Haman. Haman was a bad man. Verse 15, Nico.
According to law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? Yeah, she has not obeyed the command of the king's heirs that they not have taken to her.
So the king is asking to the other people, according to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? I mean, you don't need people to tell you what to do. The king desired to know what law was provided in such a case as hers, and what to be done according to it. And he said she had not obeyed the king's command. So that crime of disobedience to his commands, you know, he wanted the law to consider what punishment equals a crime. And now this incident, now take into account, this incident happened at the end of the festival when everybody was drunk. And it didn't seem to bother them because historically these people will make decisions where they were drunk. They will have these drunken orgies and they make great decisions. And they said decisions they made when they were drunk, they were even better than when they were sober. And the Vikings or the Germans did the same thing. They used to have these drunken orgies, and in those days they would get all the officers of the government and they would make decisions, important decisions. And that's what the text says. It says that this incident had taken place in the middle of the festival and they were drunk with wine. There was no objection to a consultation of this matter, for it was the manner of the Persians at festivals, and when inflamed with wine, to consult and determine about matters with the greatest moment. They held their councils and decrees firmer than when they were sober. So the ancient Germans or the Vikings. So, you know, most men are not present when people make the decisions. In this case, the king is going to speak about this, and everybody was in the room. So he comes in and starts speaking, you know. And of course, there's so many things about the king that is so wrong. First, the king ignores the folly of his own conduct. Here there is not the slightest hint that his request was unreasonable. The demand made by, that Vashti should be brought into the court of drunken people, he made it look like it was a solemn phrase as a commandment, something that was needed to the welfare of the state. Like, this is very important. It was nothing. It was not. His pride was hurt. Number two, the king tries to shift the blame to others. Right. This is what we said before. In this, the king showed himself the son of the first parent who blamed his wife and tried to sculpate himself. Like Adam blames Eve. Cersei is mad with Vashti. Ahab calls Elijah the troublemaker. And Herod beheads John the Baptist, like we mentioned before. Usually, a man blames his fellow men. He blames the circumstances. He blames the organization. And the last person he blames is himself. Number three, the king tries to get away from the whispers of conscience. The reasoning, if allowed or permitted, should be condoning and pacifying. Vashti's crime, quote unquote, was very small, if crime it was. Then, should the king make such a great commotion over such a small matter? Why? He inquires about what should be done as, according to the laws. He searches out for precedents and examples, but there was no precedent. This king had no right to sit in judgment, for he himself was the originator of the supposed misdemeanor. Number five, the king makes other partners in his guilt. Misery loves company. So he can also put the blame, he's going to make a decision, but he's going to say, well, it's the officers that made the decision, I just followed the law, So it's a hypocritical thing. He has no difficulty in gathering around him the wise men to consult about the crime that this woman supposedly had committed and condemn her to banishment. Now, it is difficult for us to imagine the astonishment produced by such a refusal in a country and court where the will of the foreign was absolute. The assembly and high officials were petrified with horror. That was something unusual, never happened before. Alarm for the consequences that might ensue to each of them in his own household next seized in their minds, and they are involved in deep and anxious deliberation. What punishment to inflict on the defiant queen? Now, this is that tells you right there that her life was really not ever in danger, because they will say, well, the law says she should be killed because she disobeyed. No, there was no precedent for that. So trying to say, what can we do about it? And they were talking, we're discussing, okay? So, verse 16. Who's next? Roman?
Then Memucan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the people of all the provinces of King Xerxes.
Okay, so this guy, Memucan, he's the one against the leader of these nobles. He started talking about it. And he said, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but other people. So this reasoning or argument was inconsequent and false. Vashti had not generally disobeyed the king. Again, it was not in her character to disobey the sovereign. It was only in this moment. There was no precedent for this conduct of the Persian women. She disobeyed only in this particular case, and it was done to serve a purpose. However, Memucan draws into a general consequence. This guy says what she's doing is going to implicate other women in the kingdom. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be very serious. So he made it a mountain out of a hill, So, however, Memucan draws into a general consequence, and the rest came to the conclusion which he drew. Being either too drunk to be able to discern right from wrong, or too intent in reducing the women to a state of servitude. And he said, but also all the nobles and the peoples, all the provinces of King Xerxes. So, according to him, she will be a bad example against the king she has offended by her disobedience, against others by her example. This means that Queen Vashti was setting a bad example for the wives and incited them to disobey their husband. It is a crime of high nature, they said, and therefore deserves an exemplary punishment. It is an exaggeration of her crime and made with a design to incite the king's anger toward her. Now, these nobles, just to please the king, they made it sound even more serious than it really is. Mm-hmm. Not only say the queen disobeyed the king, and that's going to be an example for other noble women. Not only for the women, but everybody in the empire, because everybody's going to know. And then what's going to happen? All the wives are going to disobey their husband. They're not going to obey the order. So it's going to be a terrible thing. Okay?
They were looking out for themselves.
Absolutely. Looking out for their own wives. Okay, verse 17, James.
I forgot my glasses, so bear with me.
Okay. Can you read?
Yeah, I know how to read. Barely, but no. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come.
Okay, so they say, for the queen's conduct will become known to all women. So everybody in the empire is going to know. It will soon be spread all over the king's dominion and reach the ears of the wives of all his subjects and become the general talk everywhere. And so these women will despise their husbands or make light of their authority, refuse subjection to them, slight their commands, and neglect to yield obedience to them, and so not to give in the honor that is due unto them. And they're going to say, King Xerxes ordered Queen Vashti to come, and she disobeyed. The queen was disobedient to King's command, refused to go along with the chamberlains sent by the king to fetch her. Verse 18, Carmen.
This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord.
Okay, so you say even the women or the nobility, the ladies of Persian media will say, they'll be the first to know, because they're watching that.
They were there.
The first to know, and they're going to take that as an example. Like the ladies of Persian media will say this day to all the king's princes when they hear of the deed of the queen. Thus contempt and wrath will arise, and they will take the first opportunity to do the same. And the rest of the women will also do the same. Talking about women's liberation, right? In those days.
Back then.
Nothing has changed, huh?
That's right.
Now, so henceforward, they will give a like answer to the husband when they lay the commands. So if the husband said, come here, wife, forget it. The queen didn't go, I'm not going to go. So as Vashti had told the king, they will tell them to their faces they will not obey their orders. So there will be no end of disrespect and discord. There will be in wives a general contempt of their husbands, which will cause discord and strife, quarrels, wrath and anger. Contempt in one part, wrath on another, and contention between both. So it'll be terrible. It'll be the destruction of the kingdom, right? Verse 19, Carmen.
Me?
19, yeah.
Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she.
Okay, so this guy started by saying, therefore, if he pleases the king, of course he's going to please the king. This is cunning politician, knew he would do that. Let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws. It's not only say something, but written in the law forever. Forever. Not only a proclamation made, but a law enacted and published by royal authority. This new decree will be inserted among the permanent laws and made a part of the constitution of the empire. And it says, which cannot be repealed. That's only in theory, because a king can do whatever he wants. Right. Okay? Cannot be repealed. This was the theory. Practically, the monarch, if he chose, could always dispense with the law. And it was therefore quite within his power to restore Vashti to her queenly dignity, notwithstanding the present degree, if he so pleased. So it was only, in writing. That Vashti is never again to enter the presence of the king Xerxes. The queen will be given what amounted to a divorce. This will have the effect of demoting her from her privileged position as the chief wife of the king. Chief wife of the king. So he had a harem. She was the top dog of the queen. But he had other wives.
He was a glutton for punishment.
But he was the queen number one.
Right.
But there were other queens.
Right.
Okay? But she was the top position. And let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. So he said, another should be made queen and enjoy the entire honor and dignity, and marks of royalty that Vashti did. Her throne, her crown, and royal appearance. That meant that all the queenly privileges and honors which the king had been pleased to distinguish her would be taken away from her. Okay. Verse 20, Nico.
Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, all the women will respect their husband from the least of the greatest.
Okay, so then it says, then when the king edict is proclaimed throughout the whole empire, and the whole empire, consisted of 170 provinces, and the decree will be published throughout since the report of the king was made everywhere. In the same way that everybody knew about what the queen did, let's issue another proclamation to counteract that thing. All the women, if that thing is gone to the empire, all the women will respect their husband from the least to the greatest. So and when the king's decree, which he has made, shall be published throughout the empire, all the wives shall be given the proper honor to their husbands, speaking respectfully to them, yielding a ready and cheerful obedience to all the commands, which will be done to princes and peasants, to high and low, to every rank of men. I mean, was this necessary really? It was not. Just to please the king.
Jealousy.
By the time this law will get to the lowest people, I mean, they were so busy trying to make a living. I mean, to that, but it was politics,
That was a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah. Verse 21, Roman.
The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice. So the king did as Malcolm proposed.
Of course they were pleased. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice because they were thinking of themselves. The king and the other 6 princes and counselors approved of the proposal and unanimously agreed to it. I wonder if somebody would disagree with it. What happened to him? So the king did as Memucan proposed. He passed a law according to his advice and signed and sealed it and registered among the laws of the kingdom, not to be revoked. Yeah, we know that. Verse 22. I'm going to read verse 22, okay? So he sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script and to each people in their own languages, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his own household using his native tongue. What does that mean? So first he sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom. Now the Persians were known for their excellent postal system.
Hey.
Yeah, and you're going to read that Herodotus, which is a Greek historian, describes the Persian system Holeric carrying. There is nothing mortal that proceeds faster than these messengers. They detail and arrange so many men and horses as they are days' journeys, a horse and a man being appointed for each journey. And neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor night prevents them from finishing what they... That's... The postal system took those words from that.
Yeah,
that's now we know where it comes from.
Yeah.
Because not a postal man would have come with that.
Nope.
No. So the first racer delivers his message to the second, and to the second to the third, and so on. It's like
That's
the
the Pony Express.
Pony Express. Pony Express was the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they would not stop, and that was very good. I guess they would ride the horse, then they change horses, and they keep riding. And then they change, and the people that were young, like at 16 years old, because, and they were really very risky.
Yeah, get robbed or killed,
Yeah. So, and it was gone to each province in his own script and to each people in their own language. What does that mean? The Persians had a practice to address proclamations to the subject nation in their own language, and not merely in the language of the conqueror. This suggests the respect that was held for local languages and dialects in the Persian Empire. It's like here in our present state. When they send something, they make an point. When you go to when I go to here Fort Lee to get money out of the ATM, it's in Korean, it's in English, in this and that and that. So no, it's not Spanish. Korean. Spanish is down in Jersey City.
I guess in different areas was more predominant.
Yeah, no, Korean. Yeah. So proclaiming that every man should be ruled over his own household using his native tongue, of course. So not only should every man be lord in his family, but he will require his own native language to be used by his wife and children. Multitudes throughout the empire marrying foreign wives, and the use of different languages in the same household may have often led to troubles in the family. Foreign wives were therefore required to learn the language of their own husband. in order that the husband's preeminence and authority in his own house might be better maintained. Now, this relates to our times too, you know. Let me give you an example. In a Spanish-speaking house, the father usually forces the kids to speak Spanish in the house,
Right.
because that's his authority over them. Because he knows as soon as the kids grow up, they're going to speak English only, okay? And he's not going to keep up with the kids.
Right,
So sometimes he forces you do not speak English in the house, only Spanish,
right,
okay? Not because that's his authority is being undermined,
right.
and in the same way in here, okay? And it's like that in a lot of places like that. And there was a series, a comedy routine, not a comedy routine, a TV show many years ago called ¿Qué pasa USA? What's going on USA? It was a household of Cuban people, okay, which the grandfather and grandmother lived there, then the father and the mother, and then the kids. The grandparents did not know English, and they were not going to learn English. The father and mother knew English, but they speak with an accent, okay? But and the kids, of course, English was the first language, and so whenever they spoke to each other, of course, the English was, you know, it was a lot of fun, and very funny too. The very funny thing was when the grandmother wanted to become American citizen, but the test was in English, so they practiced, you know, it's practice. And then the granddaughter came with an idea. He said, you know, if we answer yes to every question, you're gonna pass the exam, because I guess 80% was yes. So they took this tactic, you know, and she answered yes to everything. But in the questions, we also answered, were you ever a prostitute? And she would answer that. Okay, so it didn't work with her. It didn't work with her. So they realized, no, this is not going to work.
No.
Okay. But it was a problem like that, you know. Then eventually they changed it to so all the person over 65 could take in their own language, the test. But that didn't happen for many years. Okay. So the conclusion of that is that both God's law and common sense taught this from the foundation of the world. And that it is possible that this was not already in existence in the Persian Empire previous to this edict. Of course not, you know, everybody knew that. So the 20th verse had another clause that all wives should give the husband honor, both to great and small. This also was universally understood, of course. This law did nothing except to deprive Queen Vashti of her own crown. So this is happened, you know. And then what happens after this? Happens that he goes to war, okay, to fight the Greeks. In the meantime, the officials in the kingdom say, well, Queen Vashti is out, so let's have another queen. And that's when Queen Esther comes in. And not only the selection of Queen Esther, but even though they were beautiful, these women, it would take a whole year to prepare her before she was presented to the king. And then the king would make the selection. Right. In all this process, he was fighting the war. So when he came back, he was so depressed because he had no more queen, and that's when Queen Esther comes in. That took about 3 years, more or less. Okay, so we're gonna study that next time. But let me close this with verses from Psalm 2. It says, "What do nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth take the stand, and the rulers gather together against the Lord and against His anointed one. You kings, be wise, be warned. You rulers of the earth, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling." Amen. So all these things happen, you know, all these politics happening in every place when the Lord is the one who's behind all that and in control. Okay, so we're gonna end this today. So let me cut this. Let me finish this thing.